Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. It was just last year when I was 26 that my aunt passed away from breast cancer. Both my grandmothers had also succumbed to the disease, so I knew I needed to get screened. The specialist found some concerning cells in one of my breasts that could potentially turn cancerous at any given moment. I was given a few options. I could have regular screenings every few months until it developed into cancer, which was highly likely due to my family history, but it might never progress, meaning I'd be getting screened unnecessarily. I could have a single mastectomy on the affected breast, but they'd still need to monitor the other one, so regular checkups would still be required. Or I could opt for a bilateral mastectomy and remove all my breast tissue, essentially eliminating the risk. I went with the bilateral mastectomy. It was undoubtedly the most drastic option, but after witnessing the havoc cancer wreaked on my aunt and grandmothers, I didn't want to take any chances. I was warned about scarring, but they assured me it should be relatively minor. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. I was left with two massive, jagged, raised pink scars on either side of my chest, each about an inch long and half an inch wide. It sent me into a severe depression to the point where I wouldn't even leave my apartment because I didn't want anyone to see me. I got rid of all my mirrors and would feel physically ill looking at myself. My therapist suggested consulting a plastic surgeon, which they said they wouldn't normally recommend, but they could see how much I was struggling and how it was impacting my mental health. The therapist initially sent me to inquire about scar reduction options. The plastic surgeon proposed using a cream, a laser treatment, or implants. The cream didn't work, and the laser option was both expensive and risky, so I opted for implants. My natural breasts were an F cup, so I went with a slightly smaller DD size. Since then, my mental health has improved significantly, and I feel much better about my appearance. My confidence and self-esteem have skyrocketed. I know I shouldn't place so much importance on my looks, but those scars were genuinely awful. Huge, bright pink, jagged, raised, and just really hard to look at. I hated seeing myself, and now they're nicely hidden away, and you can barely feel them. Fast forward to the present day, I'm 28 and working in an office. I'm doing much better than I was. My coworker Samantha found out I'd had a boob job, but not about the cancer. When my friend from before the mastectomy and I were planning a trip, and she overheard my friend joking about me flying with implants. By the end of the day, the entire office knew I'd had a boob job, but not the reason behind it, and half a dozen people confirmed that Samantha had told them. Over the next few months, Samantha made numerous jokes and comments about my chest within my earshot. At one point, she said I had more plastic than Barbie and called me fake in two ways. I didn't hear this particular remark myself, but a friend in the office told me that Samantha had referred to me as a sack of silicone on one occasion. I'm not sure what her exact issue was, but at one point she mentioned the NHS, so I assumed Samantha thought I'd gotten my breasts done for free on the taxpayer's dime. I'd had the mastectomy through the NHS, but went private for therapy and implants. I asked her to stop more than once, but unfortunately the places I spoke to her were areas without cameras, like the elevator and the women's restroom. Samantha just kept making comments no matter how often I asked her not to. It wasn't an everyday occurrence, but I heard at least 3 comments per week for 3 months. I reached my breaking point when Samantha, myself, and a few other coworkers were having lunch together. I referred to something as being shallow, and Samantha said, "You'd know all about being shallow," while gesturing to my chest. I snapped. I said, "Do you know why I have these?" A few years ago, doctors found potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I was advised to get a mastectomy and was left with huge, ugly scars on my chest. I went to see a therapist who sent me to a cosmetic surgeon, who advised me to get implants to hide the scars so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. So maybe next time you want to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, you should ask them why they had it first. Feeling like that was a mic drop moment, I picked up my food and left. For the rest of the day, about a third of my office came up to me and offered their support, while the rest told me that Samantha was just joking around and that I was being an idiot. I replied that Samantha had been the one acting like an idiot for months. I then received an email from HR saying they wanted to talk to me the following day. When I called for clarification, they mentioned a hostile work environment. Note, this is apparently an American term and holds little weight in England, but that's what was said over the phone. I knew the person who signed off the email, and I'd spoken to her before. Her name was Diane, and she was Samantha's friend in HR, so I was fairly confident about who had reported me. Realizing that if this was already being sent to HR, I needed as much ammunition as possible, I started gathering information. As Diane had dealt with me so far, it was safe to assume she would be the one reviewing the complaint with me. If that were true, I would be in trouble. However, I vaguely remembered a section in my contract about complaints that stated I was contractually allowed to request a change of reviewer if I felt my allocated reviewer was biased. It was called an impartial overseer. I photocopied the page and highlighted that part. Then I messaged the people who had offered their support over Facebook saying, HR has asked to see me. Do any of you remember Samantha insulting me to your face, and are you willing to write and sign something stating what you heard and when? Not everyone was willing to help, as Samantha had made friends in HR and management, but about 20 people agreed to assist me. I guessed roughly when I'd asked Samantha to stop previously, the 4 times over the last few months. Some timings were easy to guess as they'd happened during my break or when I first arrived at work, and wrote them all down, along with an approximate time of when the lunchroom confrontation happened and a list of names of who was there. I arrived at work a bit early the next morning. I went around to everyone who had messaged me, and most managed to give me a printed and signed letter. The gist was, my name is their name. I work with Samantha last name and OP. On date, at time, approx. I spoke with Samantha last name, during which she referred to OP as, quoted, insult. I felt this was inappropriate as it directly related to OP's appearance, and I'm willing to go on record further to establish that Samantha last name has been discussing OP in the workplace in the same manner for 3 months now, causing me discomfort and creating what I feel is a hostile work environment. Signed their name. I ended up with about 16 letters, all from different people. And one of them was in the lunchroom for my conversation with Samantha. Some even had bulleted lists of everything Samantha had said to them about me or other people. As it turned out, Samantha had issues with a lot of people's appearances. She apparently made comments about one coworker's weight and something anti-Semitic about another coworker's nose, all of which were included in these letters. There are about 45 people in the office, so while 16 wasn't a majority, it was still a decent amount. The letters weren't hugely long, most were only a paragraph, but they had all the necessary information. I was asked to come to HR at 10 a.m. I took the letters from coworkers, the photocopy of the page in my contract, and my dates and times in a little folder with me. I got there, and Diane was the one overseeing the interview. She got up from her desk, ready to lead me into another room. I immediately turned to the other HR worker present and said, "So is my meeting with you then?" Diane said, "No, you're with me." I replied, "I really don't mean to be a pain, but I have it on good authority that the person on the other end of this complaint is your friend, and my contract does say I'm allowed an impartial overseer." Diane stomped off to get her supervisor. The supervisor asked how I knew she couldn't be impartial, and I told him that I had reliable information that Samantha, who was on the other end of this complaint, is a close friend of Diane's. He asked Diane if this was true, to which she only replied, "I can be impartial." The supervisor took a deep breath, asked the other HR rep to come with him, and the 4 of us went to review the complaint. I thanked them for being so accommodating. I was worried I'd annoyed them. Diane took out the complaint, and all 3 of them went through it with me. Diane looked homicidal the whole time the interview was happening, as she had clearly anticipated firing me, or at least recommending my termination. The interview went something like this. It took over half an hour, and they kept asking me the same questions, but phrased differently, so this is a drastically condensed version. Q. You said outside that you think Samantha last name reported you. Why is this? A. Samantha has had an issue with me for about 3 months now. Q. Why didn't you come to us when you realized Samantha had an issue? A. I had no issue with her. Q. What issue does Samantha have with you? A. 4 years ago, a specialist identified potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I had surgery to remove my breast tissue, thereby removing the cells and the risk. After the surgery, I was left with large scars on my chest. I went to a therapist for low self-esteem and depression. The therapist suggested a plastic surgeon who advised me to get breast implants to cover my scars. All of this is in my medical history, which you have a copy of in my file, and you have my full permission to review it. Samantha found out about my breast implants but didn't know about the cancer. Samantha had a problem with my breast implants and decided to communicate this problem to our coworkers. Q. Why do you feel this is true? A. Here are 16 signed statements, all from different coworkers, all testifying that Samantha told the entire office I'd had breast implants on the day she found out and has since made comments about these implants frequently. They have quotes of what Samantha said to them about it and rough dates and times. Q. Rough dates and times? A. No one knew this would be escalated to such an extent, so no one really took notes as and when it happened. Q. What event or events do you think directly led to this complaint of harassment? A. For me, the harassment began when Samantha told everyone about my breast implants without my consent, but as to the complaint placed against me, it would probably be what happened at about time yesterday in the lunchroom. Samantha made a comment about me being shallow while gesturing to my breasts, and I replied by giving her an abridged version of my relevant medical history and ending with a comment about the importance of getting the full story. There are cameras in the lunchroom, so I'm sure you'll be able to find that conversation. Here's a list of names of people who were also present. There were 6 people at the table, including myself and Samantha. One of these people is also in those letters, and has written their account of the conversation and signed it. Q. Had you had a conversation with Samantha prior to this regarding her comments about you? A. Several, spaced out over the last 3 months. Each time I communicated to her that I felt uncomfortable and upset with these comments she was making and would appreciate it if she were to stop. Q. To your knowledge, was Samantha made aware of your former cancer at any point in this time? A. No. It wasn't mentioned in the conversation with my friend she overheard, and I didn't tell her because, frankly, it's none of her business, and I did not feel the need to detail my medical history to a coworker in order to avoid further sexual harassment. The supervisor stood up and said, "Well, I think we're done here." He shook my hand and sent me back to my desk, saying that I'd hear from them after they reviewed the evidence, letters, CCTV, medical history, and anything they had already, and made a decision on the case. I got back to my desk, pulled up my CV, and prepared to start the job search again. About an hour went by, then the person who wrote the letter and was there for the lunchroom conversation got called for a meeting with HR. They came back 10-ish minutes later. The other people who were also there for the lunchroom conversation got called one by one, except Samantha. All of them were gone for about 10 minutes, then came back, found a coworker, and said that HR wanted to see them. Then the people who wrote letters but weren't there yesterday were also called one by one and were each gone for about 10 minutes each, some longer, some shorter. By about 3:30, it looked like everyone who wrote a letter or was there in the lunchroom had been interviewed. Then, finally, Samantha got called in. She was gone for about 30 minutes and came back fuming. She glared at me while I worked, but I ignored her. Around 4:30-ish, Samantha got called into HR again. 5 p.m. rolled around, and everyone was either leaving or getting ready to leave when Samantha stormed back into the office. She glared at me the whole time she packed up her desk. She then started telling anyone who would listen that I got her fired before shoving her way onto the elevator. An email came in from HR. Your case is closed. The next one is an entitled people story. My wife and I worked our entire lives to be able to afford our dream home, a beautiful house overlooking the ocean. The panoramic views of the waves crashing on the shoreline were breathtaking. We were thrilled when we finally purchased the perfect property. However, that dream quickly turned into a nightmare when a new neighbor moved in next door. His name was Carl, and he was the definition of the stereotypical grumpy old man. He complained about every little thing and always had a scowl on his face. We tried our best to be friendly and courteous, but our efforts were met with grumbles and glares. We figured he was just a harmless curmudgeon and we could avoid him easily enough. That illusion was shattered when we looked out our window one morning to a shocking sight. Carl was building a gigantic fence along the property line, completely blocking our million-dollar ocean views. We rushed outside to confront him, though I tried to remain calm. "Carl, what is this fence for? It's blocking our entire view," I said. "Don't like it? Too bad. I'm allowed to build whatever I want on my property. Maybe you should have thought about that before you bought this place," he sneered. My wife was irate. "How could you do something so nasty? Just because you're miserable doesn't mean you have to ruin things for everyone else." Carl just chuckled. "I warned you I'm not the neighborly type. I value my privacy, but hey, if you want, I'd be happy to sell you a small portion of my land so you can see over the fence, for the low price of $100,000, of course." I was fuming but refused to cave into his demands. "Absolutely not. I know you're doing this just to antagonize us, but it's not going to work." Storming back inside, my wife and I racked our brains trying to find a solution. We looked up laws about fence heights and setbacks, but unfortunately there was nothing preventing Carl from having that towering fence. After a sleepless night, an idea struck me. If Carl wanted to play dirty, then we could too. I told my wife, "Two can play this game. Let's see how Carl likes getting a taste of his own medicine." The next day, we hired a landscaper to plant a row of huge cypress trees right along Carl's fence. Within a few years, those dense, fast-growing trees would completely block his view to the ocean and shade his entire yard. Carl immediately noticed the trees going in and came barreling over. "How dare you!" he yelled. "You're planting those just to get back at me!" I shrugged nonchalantly. "What are you talking about? Cypress trees are permitted in this area. I simply wanted to beautify our landscape. Carl fumed, but knew he was trapped by his own spiteful logic. Over the next weeks, we made sure to give him more misery. My wife purposefully played loud music in the yard whenever he was outside. I installed bright spotlights shining onto his property all night long since he had ruined our once peaceful evenings. The final cherry on top was when we filed complaints to the city about his unpermitted front porch addition, citing it as an eyesore. The building inspector came out and made Carl tear it down. It wasn't long before Carl was stomping onto our property, red-faced and screaming, "You've made your point. I'll build a normal fence, okay? Just make these attacks stop." We savored that sweet success. Within a week, the monstrosity fence came down. Seeing that beautiful ocean view restored was the ultimate revenge. Carl learned the hard way not to mess with us. All disputes aside, we then tried extending an olive branch, hoping to have a cordial relationship again. I think Carl finally realized he didn't want any more neighbor wars. The next one is a petty revenge story. This is not my story. It belongs to a friend of mine. I couldn't stop laughing at the subtlety and nuance of her win this week and have to relate it. A is an executive assistant for the CEO. While she works mostly for one person, there's an executive team that she also does some work for, and one of these is C. C, for want of a better word, is the epitome of the office Karen. She takes great joy in being condescending, rude, taking credit for everyone else's work, and throwing people under the bus. Difficult to work with is a bit of an understatement. When A first started working there, C reported her to her boss for attitude on a number of occasions, when all A was doing was trying to hide her frustration because C was deliberately being obtuse and making A's life unnecessarily difficult. A's boss is well aware of the friction, however C is actually very good at her job, and she's clever enough to not cross lines that will get her in deep trouble. Decided if she couldn't beat him, she'd join them, in the best and most subtle possible way. Earlier this week, A ensured her boss overheard her talking to a client, praising C to the heavens. It was actually a real client call, not faked. When she hung up, her boss praised her for being the bigger person and talking up C despite their relationship. When C came in, the boss made a special mention to her that A had been praising her while A just sat there smiling innocently at her. C was not happy about this, but couldn't do or say a thing without looking like an ass. To put the cherry on top, the following morning, A greeted her with, "C, you look so tired. Are you okay? Can I make you a coffee?" C said no and stomped into her office. Every time she came out, A proceeded to say, "You really don't look well. Are you sure you're okay? Is there anything I can do for you?" Meanwhile, A's boss overheard all of these exchanges and once again praised her for setting aside their differences and trying to make things work. By the end of the day, C was visibly seething, and A was the boss's new favorite. We believe C may well be a basket case by Christmas. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I originally posted this in Duck You Karen, but someone seemed to imply it'd be a good fit for you guys, so enjoy this lovely exchange from Monday. So I work in online fulfillment at a large home, garden, and building supply store. Mysterious. My job title comes into play later, as technically we aren't supposed to work with customers directly, just point them in the right direction or find another associate who works in that department. I had a massive order to grab, several heavy and large pieces of sheet metal and screws. Problem is, the sheet metal size I need isn't where it's meant to be, so I'm having to scan pretty much everything to figure out what's what. Bigger problem? This lingering in the wild sadly put me in range of a wild Karen attack. Wild Karen, raging harpy voice, "Are you gonna help me or not? Yours truly." Suddenly very confused, looking at her, especially as she hasn't spoken to me at all. Wild Karen, increasingly annoyed, seeming, "Well? I've been standing over there forever and you haven't offered to help me. Yours truly." My bad, I can try. I don't work in this department, so it depends if Wild Karen suddenly actively hostile try. Ugh, no you will. It doesn't matter if you work in this department or not. Yours truly, taking calming breaths so I don't lash back, wondering what this woman's problem is. Okay, what do you need? Definitely unable to control annoyance in my tone as this woman is yelling at me. "Wild Karen, this!" Not joking when I say proceeds to suddenly pull out a screw and nearly stab me in the eye, shoving it towards me. Yours truly pushes her hand away, feeling much less calm as I have a PTSD reaction to people putting hands in my face, much less a feckin' screw now visibly shaking. "Okay, ma'am. Screws are at the end of this aisle, on the left." "What Wild Karen? I already know that." Yours angrily. "Okay, what size is that? What size do you need?" Wild Karen. Even angrier for some reason, "You tell me." Takes a step closer as of trying to seem threatening, yours angrily, unable to hold back. I have no clue, ma'am. There's an entire wall of screws. It's impossible for me to tell its size by just looking at it, wailed Karen. You will not come at me like that, says me like she's royal and I should feel afraid. Your manager would not like that. Yours no longer giving a duckly, you think? Well, I can get a manager if you'd like. Maybe one of them can identify the screw by sight, wailed Karen. Don't make me mad today. Just do your job. Cue what could count as malicious compliance. Yours fecking over. This idiot realizes I had already told her exactly where the product she needed would be located. Yes, ma'am. I walked away from her to my trolley and proceeded to continue looking for the items on my order. Wild Karen, what are you doing? Yours freely. My job. What was funny was, an aisle over, one of our assistant managers actually was nearby. With Karen ranting and stomping like a toddler, I walked over when I noticed him and told him I had 2 issues. 1, can't find the item. 2, got Karen he may want to talk to. He laughed and showed me where the correct size sheet metal improperly was and totally ignored her, same as I was, until she huffed loudly and stormed away. I don't think she liked that my manager did like how I handled the situation. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.